Hi, welcome to Discovery Quests. I hope you all are doing great today.
Ancient Troy, the city and the legend of the Trojan War. Troy is an ancient city and archaeological site in modern-day Turkey, but is also famously the setting for the legendary Trojan War in Homer's epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. In legend, the city of Troy was besieged for 10 years and eventually conquered by a Greek army led by King Agamemnon. This Trojan War erupted because Helen, a queen from Sparta, was abducted by Paris, the son of Troy's king Priam, according to Homer's epic poem Iliad. Throughout the Iliad, the gods, including Hera, Athena, and Poseidon, supporting the Greeks, and Aphrodite, Apollo, and Ares, rooting for the Trojans, constantly intervene. Troy also refers to a real ancient city, also known as Hissarlik, located on the northwest coast of Turkey, about 3 miles, 4.8 kilometers, from the Dardanelles. It has been identified by many as the legendary Troy, featured in Homer's poems. Whether the Trojan War actually took place, and whether the site in northwest Turkey is the same Troy, are matters of debate. The idea that Hissarlik is the real-life location of the city portrayed by Homer goes back at least 2,700 years, when the ancient Greeks were colonizing the west coast of what is now Turkey. In the 19th century, the idea again came to popular attention when Heinrich Schliemann, a German businessman and early archaeologist, conducted a series of excavations at Hissarlik and discovered treasures he claimed belonged to King Priam. Number 7. The Legend of Troy and the Trojan Horse. The Trojan War is thought to have taken place near the end of the Bronze Age, around or before 1200 BC. At that time, a Greek civilization we call the Mycenaean was collapsing. The Mycenaeans built great palaces and developed a system of writing, and their culture dominated the Greek world for about 300 years before their decline. In the Iliad, the Greek forces are led by Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae. The earliest accounts of this war come from Homer, a Greek author who lived around the 8th century BC, several centuries after the war supposedly took place. Homer's works were told through oral stories and do not appear to have been written down until even later, likely during the 6th century BC. Homer's Iliad is set in the 10th year of the Greek siege of Troy and tells of a series of events that appear to take place over a few weeks. The story makes clear that the siege had taken its toll on the Greek force sent to recover Helen. By this point, the war had essentially become a stalemate, with the Greeks unable to take the city and the Trojans unable to drive the invading force into the sea. We, sons of the Achaeans Greeks, outnumber the Trojans, those who live in the city, but there are companions from other cities in their numbers, wielders of the spear, to help them, the Iliad says. Number 6. Who won the Trojan War? Contrary to popular belief, the Iliad does not end with the destruction of Troy, but with a temporary truce, after which the fighting presumably continues. Another Homeric epic poem called the Odyssey is set after the destruction of the city and features the Greek hero Odysseus trying to get home. That poem briefly references how the Greeks took Troy using the famous Trojan Horse. The Greeks left a gift to the Trojans of a giant wooden horse as an offering to the goddess Athena that concealed Greek warriors within, while the Greek army, encamped outside the city walls, made as if to sail home. Armand Dangour, professor of classics at Oxford University, wrote in a BBC article in 2014. The Trojans took the offering into the city, and the Greeks emerged from the horse and attacked the unsuspecting Trojans. What a thing was this too, which that mighty man wrought and endured in the carven horse, wherein all we chiefs of the Argives were sitting, bearing to the Trojans death and fate, reads part of the poem, translation by A.T. Murray through Perseus Digital Library. Like the Iliad, the Odyssey was also probably not written down until sometime after the death of Homer. One of the earliest surviving copies of the Odyssey is a fragment of the text that appears on a 5th century BC pottery shard found at Olbia in modern-day Ukraine. 5. The city's origin. The site of Hisarlik in northwest Turkey has been identified as the site of the legendary Troy since ancient times. Archaeological research shows that it was inhabited for almost 4,000 years, starting around 3500 BC. The city was constantly changing, and the settlement was destroyed and rebuilt repeatedly. After one city was destroyed, a new city would be built on top of it, creating a human-made mound called a tell. Troy took off in the period after 2550 BC. The city was considerably enlarged and furnished with a massive defensive wall made of cut blocks of stone and rectangular clay bricks, Van Wijngaarden wrote. He noted that the settlement's citadel featured houses of the megaron type, which contained an elongated room with a hearth and open forecourt. When Heinrich Schliemann excavated this level of Troy in 1873, he discovered a cache of treasure, which he believed belonged to King Priam. The collection of weapons, gold, silver, electrum, copper and bronze vessels, gold jewelry, including thousands of gold rings, and a range of other objects made of precious materials, apparently came to light close to the outer side of the city wall near the building, which Schliemann designated as the Royal Palace. Trevor Bryce, a researcher at the University of Queensland in Australia, wrote in his book, The Trojans and Their Neighbours, Routledge, 2006. Number 4, Homer's Troy. Two other phases or layers of Troy that date between roughly 1700 BC and 1190 BC may be the city that featured in Homer's works. Bryce noted that during this period the city's defenses were formidable. The walls, surmounted by mud brick breastworks, once reached a height of 9 meters, 80 feet. Several watchtowers were built into these walls, the most imposing of which is the northeastern bastion, which served to reinforce the citadel's defenses as well as offer a commanding view over the Trojan plain, he wrote. The exact size of the city is disputed. Archaeological work on the site shows that there was a lower city beyond the citadel, bringing its total size to about 30 hectares, 74 acres. Archaeologist Manfred Kaufmann, who led excavations at the site, wrote in a study published in the book Troy, From Homer's Iliad to Hollywood Epic, Blackwell Publishing, 2007. This Troy had a large residential area below a strongly fortified citadel. As far as we know today, the citadel was unparalleled in its region and in all of southeastern Europe, he wrote. The extent of the residential area is a topic of debate among scholars, with some arguing that Kaufmann overestimated its extent. But was this really the same city as the one depicted by Homer? While scholars have noted that the topography of Troy, as told in the legend, does seem to generally match that of the real-life city, a key problem with identifying it as Homer's Troy is the way the city was destroyed. Cracks in its walls suggest that it was hit by an earthquake around 1300 BC, possibly followed by an uprising or attack. Number 3. Later, Troy, a venerated site. Troy was abandoned around 1000 BC, but was reoccupied in the 8th century BC, around the time Homer lived. The Greeks called the reoccupied city Ilion. Many scholars believe that the people who resettled Troy were Greek colonists, although there is some evidence that people who already lived in the area also settled in the reoccupied settlement. In 2014, a team of scholars published research in the Oxford Journal of Archaeology that examined amphorae at Troy dating to after 1000 BC and found that they were locally made rather than imported from Greece, leading the researchers to conclude that the new settlers were not exclusively from Greece. For its first few centuries, Ilion was a modest settlement, although it later grew thanks to its association with Homer's works. The new settlers had no doubt that the place they were preparing to occupy was the fabled setting of the Trojan War, Bryce wrote, and in later times its inhabitants took advantage of this to draw in political support and ancient tourists. Xerxes, the Persian king, lived 519, 466 BC, stopped to pay homage to Troy on his way to attack Greece around 480 BC, and most notably Alexander the Great, 356 to 323 BC, did the same on his way to conquer the Persian Empire, and he granted it special status within his empire. To Troy today. In the 1860s, Frank Calvert carried out excavations at the site and was convinced that the site was likely Troy, and his work helped persuade Heinrich Schliemann to carry larger excavations at the site starting in 1870. Schliemann dug deep into the city, most famously unearthing treasures that he incorrectly attributed to King Priam. His work greatly increased the fame of the site. Archaeological work continued off and on over the next 150 years. As archaeological techniques were refined and new scientific tests, such as radiocarbon dating, were discovered, the different levels of Troy could be more accurately dated. This dating was important as it showed what levels could be associated with the Trojan War and what levels were too early. They also proved that the artifacts that Schliemann attributed to King Priam were created almost a millennium before Priam lived. Number 1, was there a Trojan War? The big question researchers still face is, was there ever a Trojan War? Unfortunately, there are few written clues for scholars to go on. The only written record found at Troy that dates to before the Greek colonization in the 8th century BC is a seal written in a language called Luwian, which was perhaps brought to Troy from elsewhere in Turkey. Archaeologists unearthed historical records at Hattusa, the capital city of the Hittite Empire, in modern-day Turkey in the late 19th and early centuries. The Hittite Empire thrived in the region from roughly 1750 BC to 1200 BC, and Hittite records claim that Troy, which the Hittites called Wilusa, was likely a vassal state of the empire around the time of the Trojan War. British museum curators Leslie Fitton and Alexandra Villing wrote in a blog post, "This means that Troy may not have been an independent kingdom, something that contradicts the story told by Homer." The records do, however, mention fighting between the Hittites and people from Greece over Wilusa, the curators noted, suggesting that it's possible that this fighting could have served as a basis for the Trojan War stories. These issues leave researchers with a mystery about the truth of the Trojan War. At one end of the spectrum of opinion is the conviction that there was indeed a war and that it was pretty much as the poet described it, Bryce wrote. From that, we pass through varying degrees of skepticism and agnosticism to the other end of the spectrum, where the tradition is consigned wholly to the realm of fantasy.
That's it for today. We will meet with another interesting topic very soon.